From Illinois Public Media, this is the 21st Show. I'm Brian Mackey. For years, workers at the Choate Mental Health and Developmental Center in Anna have been accused of abusing and neglecting the center's residents. Located in Anna, again about half an hour south of Carbondale, the center opened in 1873, and it was meant to serve Illinoisans with mental health issues and developmental disabilities. In 2023, Governor J.B. Pritzker announced plans to repurpose Choate while also giving its residents a chance to move to other facilities to receive care. Now the state is ending the intellectual and developmental disabilities general units at the center by the end of September and taking out 75 civil mental health beds by next March. And the union that represents most employees at Choate says the State Department of Human Services is planning to lay off 250 of the center's more than 500 employees. Here to talk about all this and the reactions to it is Olivia Olander, state government reporter at the Chicago Tribune. Olivia, welcome back to the 21st Show.
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me.
We'll be spending the first 15 minutes of today's program on this topic. If you have thoughts about conditions at Choate or the layoffs, or if you have questions about this, you can join us at 800-222-9455. That's 800-222-9455. All right, Olivia, say more than I did in the introduction there about these allegations of abuse and neglect at Choate over the years.
Yeah, so this was really a few years ago, around 2022, that a lot of these allegations were coming out. There was an investigation specifically by ProPublica, Capital News, and Lee that found that state police had started at least 40, I think, dozens of criminal probes into alleged employee misconduct, abuse, different activities at Choate. A lot of it, obviously, against residents. And this really got a lot of attention from the media, certainly at first, but then the state. And in 2023, Governor Pritzker said, we're going to have basically a 3-year transition plan to change things at Choate in a pretty major way. So what happened, at the end of July with Choate was not, I don't think, a huge surprise, hearing that they were, finally sort of fully winding things down, but obviously sort of having this all, for the union, I think it came a bit suddenly after the budget was passed in the spring, not really giving any inkling of this. And then, I think for some in the community as well, it was a bit of a surprise to see something like this. But overall, this is sort of part of a bigger plan by the governor's office to say, maybe we should be making some major changes at Choate.
Yeah, we've talked on the show about those allegations with those very reporters, that report you cited from Capital News and Lee and ProPublica. But, the term abuse and neglect leaves a lot to the imagination. And, we're talking about things like obstructing investigations and lying to police, but also, some really weird behavior. I don't know if you can, the hot sauce thing stood out to me in your story. Can you just talk a little bit more about what sort of allegations we're talking about here?
Yeah, really, as you said, it does leave a lot up to the imagination, and there were, again, a lot of allegations. There's a wide range. Certainly, no example gives maybe an exact picture of the whole thing, but I think what you're referring to is there was an allegation that employees forced a resident to eat a cup of hot sauce, which, again, as you said, is a pretty graphic allegation. And as you said, then there were also allegations of workers essentially covering things up, not reporting things as these things were happening.
So I mentioned that Governor Pritzker, had announced this repurposing of Choate a little more than 3 years ago. What has happened in terms of the population there since then? Yeah,
so it has been reduced quite a bit. In the announcement that the state put out about this. First, the state went to the facility itself, basically, and made this announcement. Then the union and some other community advocates made it more public. But this is a pretty significant reduction. I mean, in terms of staff, what we're seeing from this latest announcement is a 250% reduction in staff, and there were only about 500 there at the beginning the month to start with. But as far as residents, there were about 200 people in 2023, which, as you said, is when the governor made this announcement. And that's in their like intellectual and developmental disability unit. And then when the governor's team, or I guess the Department of Human Services, made this announcement last month, it's now 16. So 200 to 16, which is pretty significant. There are some other things remaining, like a 40-person forensic unit is going to remain down there. That's one of the things that Choate is, sort of specializes in. But overall, this is a really significant reduction in residents. A lot of them are going to community placements, which is like group homes, what we sort of think of as like in the community homes where people can live independently or somewhat independently. But a lot of them are actually going to other state-operated developmental centers, which has been something of a point of contention for some advocates. But in general, they are no longer at Choate, which was one of the big goals of the administration.
Yeah, this has been a fight that, back when I was a State House reporter, even 15 years ago, I remember standing outside Governor Pat Quinn's office at the time as he was trying to do some of this work at other facilities, and parents of some of the people who live there were at odds with advocates who want more people put into sort of more group home type settings. So you mentioned a lot of residents have already moved elsewhere. What about the 16 who remain? What do we know about what happens to them?
I don't know necessarily. Maybe you know something about that specifically, but I don't know that we necessarily have a total read on what is going to happen to those last 16 individuals.
No, fair. It wasn't a leading question. Well, I guess, time will tell. Let me take a moment to remind listeners, this is the 21st show. We're talking about a reduction in operations and staffing at the Choate Mental Health Center in Southern Illinois, the troubled Choate Mental Health Center in Anna. The state told the union representing most of the center's employees it plans to lay off 250 of them, which is about half the workforce. We've been talking about what led up to this with Olivia Olander, state government reporter at the Chicago Tribune. You can join us at 800-222-9455, 800-222-9455. So we've mentioned the union. This is the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME, Council 31. That's the big statewide organization. I understand the leadership is not pleased. Say more about why.
No, not pleased at all. To your point, there are still a significant number of workers there and a significant number of AFSCME workers there. So just to your last question about, what will happen to the remaining residents, there are still, it seems from the numbers that are publicly available, that there are still probably like a couple hundred employees there. So that is, one thing to keep in mind. But yeah, no, they're not pleased at all. And of course, AFSCME and any union is going to have an issue when one of their, major employers announces layoffs. But I think specifically there was some additional frustration expressed in the announcement from AFSCME that they, sent out to reporters and to the public, because there were indications during the state budget process, which is in the spring, that this was not a budget that included massive layoffs. I sat in some of those hearings when the budget was getting discussed and passed. And of course, that's something that's asked of the legislators, is this budgeting in any major layoffs? And I do even remember at that time, the answer that everyone seemed to be on was no, this was not going to be a budget that had layoffs. So I think that is why it caught them by surprise a bit. Of course, Anna, Illinois, this is a place where, a lot of folks to get a sort of comparable job might have to drive quite a ways. It's not, I live in Chicago. It's not Chicago, where there's many major comparable employers within a short driving distance. So I think for a lot of folks, it is, a potentially life-changing thing to lose a job like this.
Yeah, prisons, developmental centers, universities, all these big state institutions are often the major employer in these towns. And you have to go to like Jacksonville, Illinois, where there was a developmental center that closed, 10, 15 years ago. I don't have the exact date in front of me. And that is still sort of a big hole in the middle of that town, metaphorically and physically. the State Department of Human Services says it's going to work to find new employment at other state facilities for the staff who are affected by these layoffs. What does the union say about that?
Yeah, they basically say, that's good, but if it means driving 3-4 hours, it's just not the same. It's still something that they're unhappy about, and that they're clearly expressing that and fighting about it to the state.
Beyond the union, local lawmakers react to stories like this. What have you heard with regard to that?
Yeah, the local a local state senator down in downstate Illinois who is very involved in these issues. Terry Bryan of Murfreesboro, she was one of the first people to sort of sound the alarm locally on this, saying that this is going to be, again, just she said, used the word, I think, devastating blow to Southern Illinois, just a big deal to a community where a lot of folks are employed there. It's just been a lot part of the community for a long time. So, and those folks are also concerned about patients as well, residents of these facilities who then maybe they might have lived close to Anna, and now they might be moving somewhere else. So I think that is a concern as well.
So far we've talked mostly about the negative reaction to this. There are some people, as I mentioned, happened 15 years ago with Governor Quinn, who are happy about this sort of news. A group of providers serving Illinoisans with intellectual and developmental disabilities seems to be taking the news well. What did they have to say?
Yeah, and maybe we should back up a little bit to the reasons that the governor chose to sort of do this wind down in the first place. Of course, allegations of abuse was a big part of it, but there is sort of this national, societal movement away from keeping individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in large sort of congregate facilities, that might operate just more like an institution than like a home. They might work for some people, but a lot of advocates say that that's not maybe what the first choice should be for a lot of adults with disabilities. So, that's a big philosophical reason that, the state is sort of moving away from that. So the community providers that are, represent some of those group homes that some of these folks might want to move to, these sort of smaller homes that might have just a handful of residents and be in the community. Those folks are obviously celebrating the closure, or not closure, but the continued wind down of Choate. And they're saying that, yes, this is an opportunity for some people to be able to get into a less institutional facility. As I kind of mentioned before, one sort of criticism in the midpoint assessment of this transition from the group Equipped for Equality was that some individuals are just getting moved from one large institution to another, even if they want to move to a smaller home. So I think that that's going to be something that we're going to be continuing to watch, is whether those people are ever able to sort of get off that, waiting list, so to speak, and go to the setting that they want to go to. But yeah, some people are definitely celebrating this wind down as it happens.
Yeah, well, and obviously staffing at some of these other care, in the care field in general, right? From we talked about childcare recently on the program to care for in group home settings. That is a challenge there as well. So what you mentioned, looking ahead, what are you going to be watching for as all of this plays out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I am going to be, watching to see what workers are able to do, what the, of course, sort of economic impact is of this. But I think most immediately I'm going to be watching for individuals who have moved out of Choate, recently or in the last couple of years, whether they've seen their just sort of day-to-day lives improved. I mean, these are settings where hundreds, more than 1,000 people in Illinois are currently living their daily lives as in state-operated developmental centers. So I think I'll be watching to see if moving away from Choate, whether it is to another state-operated developmental center or a community setting, is improving just the daily lives for these folks. And of course, what their families are saying, because some of these individuals they're on a whole range of how much they're able to express these things for themselves. So what individuals are feeling, and also, what their families are seeing in their loved ones who might be going through a really big transition right now.
All right, Olivia Olander has been covering this story for the Chicago Tribune. She's a state government reporter there. Olivia, thanks so much for joining us here on the 21st Show and sharing your reporting with us.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Coming up after the break, we're going to be sticking with the theme of state institutions, but we'll be talking about the Illinois prison system after we come back. They opened a mental health center in Joliet. Coming up on a decade ago, it was supposed to lead to more humane treatment for inmates with serious mental illness, but over the past few years, the men incarcerated there say they are being driven to desperation. We'll talk about it with a reporter who did a deep dive into this story after a short break. You're listening to the 21st Show. Stay with us.